recording you on purpose. You threatened me the whole way home.
A viral social media moment that, among several other documented cases, has spurred Uber SA to prioritize its passenger safety in Mzansi.
Yeah, go, got your license plate.
But what if media personality Anele Mdoda didn't reach for her cell phone to film this allegedly threatening Uber driver in Cape Town in February? Without Anele's video evidence, how would this have affected Uber's investigation into this incident? The outcome of this probe remains unknown because the e-hailing giant claims it violates the Protection of Personal Information Act. But legal journalist Karyn Maughan does not buy that argument.
I'm not entirely sure that that's legal defense in this particular instance.
We chat with her next on The Lead. Later in the shows, there's some solace for East London locals as an alleged extortion racket leader's brought to book, and the mother city's premier marathon trends for all the right reasons. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. Uber South Africa's management insists it's done everything in its power to bolster features that keep its passengers safe, following TV personality Anele Mdoda's February accusation that an Uber driver in Cape Town had threatened her with rape. Now, Uber SA says it's resolved this matter, but can't say much due to the POPIA Act. Well, to chat more, News 24 legal journalist Karyn Maughan joins me now from our Johannesburg studios. How's it, Karyn? So lovely to chat again.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking about this.
Absolutely. So let's recount what happened here, Karyn. Anele went on X in February, if we recall. She revealed that she had indicated on the Uber app at the time that she didn't want to talk to her specific Uber driver in Cape Town. This is called the quote-unquote no conversation option. Now, due to this, Anele then alleged the driver had eventually become angry and stated, apparently according to her, quote, "In my country, we would rape you to teach you a lesson." Before we get into your response to all of this and recounting this, let's just play a very quick clip of Anele recording the driver as she's dropped off at the Cape Town location.
No, say it again. He threatened me the whole way back here. Say it again. Say it again. Say it again. I'm recording him on purpose. I'm recording you on purpose. You threatened me the whole way home. Yeah. Go. Got your license plate.
Okay, so now that we understand that and have the context, what's the latest from Uber SA, Karyn?
Well, essentially what they indicated was that they had used trip data, which they said, was available to them from the app, but also what they described as videos submitted to them by Anele Mdoda. They clearly spoke to the driver, but they didn't want to disclose either of those people's versions of events because they're claiming that they're not allowed to do so under the POPIA Act. But they have said that the complaint has been resolved. I then pushed them on the point of, is this person still on your platform? And they said appropriate action has been taken against the driver, but they didn't want to explicitly confirm that he was no longer on the platform.
Sure. And they're basically using the POPIA Act here, saying that is essentially barring them from giving a lot more detail about this investigation. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure that that's a legal defense in this particular instance. I mean, the POPIA Act is intended to ensure that people's private information is not disclosed without their permission. But, to say that someone who's been implicated in harassment or the misconduct as alleged by Anele Mdoda, that issue can no longer be discussed seems quite a bizarre line of logic to me, and I don't think it's legally sustainable.
Yeah, it seems like it's common course these days for any PR company or corporate just to say, sorry, POPIA Act, we can't really divulge anything here. So it kind of fell on Anele, and her instinct was correct, it seems, to then take out her phone and start shooting video, because ultimately it feels, and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like that hinged a lot on whether or not this case could be resolved in Anele's instance, right? Was the video evidence?
Yeah, and I mean, Uber actually said as much. I mean, they were quick to stress on this briefing because they'd invited myself and a number of other journalists to one of their headquarters in Johannesburg to obviously address what is a serious concern for them. i.e. the safety issues and the concerns that were raised by a number of other women after Anele went public with her alleged experience. But they were quick to say, well, you can record the trip. You have all these facilities available to you. Some of the drivers have dash cams. There are all these mechanisms available to ensure that you are able to accumulate evidence, as they said, which would then help, resolve the dispute. But I think the feeling is overwhelmingly that, you shouldn't have to be put in that situation anyway. I mean, as a woman getting into a vehicle, you assume a degree of safety, or you should be assuming a degree of safety. For someone to have made the comments that Anele says this driver made was rampantly inappropriate. Of course, he's reportedly given a very different version of events and sought to lay blame on her and essentially make a lot of allegations about her. But, I would be very cautious of buying into that version of events without, when in fact she has clearly got the level of evidence that she got in regards to some of those video recordings.
Absolutely. And as you've been recalling, just days before Anele's case, you had also interviewed Johannesburg. She was in Johannesburg at the time, but Sarah Scott, she endured quite a scary ordeal in her instance. She was waiting for an Uber at her friend's Hyde Park home, and then it seemingly arrived according to the app, but then she emerged from the house only to face her potential kidnappers in a different vehicle from what the app was showing at the time. And she thankfully fought them off. They fled. She survived. What does Uber South Africa say about that case?
Well, the concern has been since the 2016 so-called Uber gang, who are currently on trial in the Palm Ridge High Court in Johannesburg, was essentially the allegation in that 2016 case is that an Uber driver who was one of the alleged perpetrators in that matter, that gang contained a sort of reign of terror of pretending to be picking people up, and he used his position as an Uber driver to know the names of the people who were requiring the ride, to say, no, I'm here to pick you up, to essentially fake being the car that was meant to pick them up. And, it's late at night, as was the case with Sue Day. I mean, she was in her 60s at that stage. She got into the vehicle without checking the registration, and it was not the vehicle. And she then gets subjected to this incredibly traumatic, multiple hours, rape, abduction, robbery experience before she's thrown out. And so the concern was and this happened in multiple instances. I mean, among the victims were a married couple where the wife was so severely traumatized that she couldn't testify. Her husband had to testify about his wife's rape. There was another woman who was also abducted. She was subjected to near strangulation. These are absolutely horrendous events. And Uber's saying, well, we learned from this terrible experience. It shouldn't have happened to anyone. And we've now got these safeguards. But in the Sarah Scott incident, there was this apprehension that, potentially the person there was an Uber driver who may have been able to see that she'd summoned a ride and had then gone to pick her up on the pretense that he was the driver. Of course, Sarah, as you can see in the video, checks the license plate and then backs off. And then one of the assailants tries to force her in the vehicle where there's another attacker sitting there, unsuccessfully, thank God. But Uber has gone on record and said, we've done an investigation and that car is not linked to Uber. We don't believe the people involved are linked to Uber. One must assume that they were potentially looking at the registration details of the car, but they have said that at this point, there's no evidence that that same Susan Day Uber gang scenario replicated itself with Sarah Scott.
And in your latest piece, Uber essays basically come out saying that the app now safeguards against scammers essentially impersonating drivers. Because I didn't know this, that you could, rent a registered driver's details as advertised, of course, on Facebook Marketplace. I didn't know that exists.
Yes, and apparently it's quite prevalent. And, Uber was very quick to say, look, this is a e-hailing service issue. So, it's in one of the profiles that I saw, it said Uber/Bolt. So they're saying that it's happening across, but in their particular instance, because their app requires the driver to identify himself with a face scan before he can actually open the app. Anyone presenting themselves as being able to rent out their Uber profile is scamming, people who would want to do that. But I think, there are still concerns, and those concerns will always exist in a country where we have the rates of crime that we have, and we particularly have the rates of gender-based violence that we have, because getting into a vehicle as any person, some of the victims of the Uber gang were men. They were predominantly women, but there was one male. You were inevitably vulnerable. And in the Uber gang case, you would be in the vehicle and then people would push down the boot and assail you and trap you, and make you essentially unable to move while you were victimized for this, however long this ordeal went on for.
I mean, Karyn, you are a esteemed, fantastic journalist. You've been on the scene, the beat, for the longest time. I remember when Uber and Bolt first came out, it wouldn't be out of the question for even a female journalist to take a potential quick Uber down to like the Western Cape High Court or whatever the case. But that was in the early days. These days, I would not allow my partner to take an Uber or a Bolt on her own, whatever the circumstances. Of course, she's free to do so if she really wants to, but I just don't feel that she'd be safe in that scenario. And even sometimes with a friend, two women in an Uber, I still get very, very nervous, even in some of the most quote-unquote, safe areas of Cape Town. How do you feel about being a South African woman and possibly taking Uber or Bolt these days?
Well, I take Ubers all the time because I don't have a car. In my experience, the only really scary incident I ever had was at the height of the Jacob Zuma prosecution, where my Uber driver recognized me and said, are you Karyn Maughan? And I was like, yes. And then he said, quote unquote, why does everyone hate you? And I just had this sinking feeling of dread. And he came across as quite aggressive. And I just had to sort of talk him out of the belief that I was a bad person who had done wrong to the former president. But it was a very nerve-wracking experience for me. That being said, I've had remarkably good experiences with other Uber drivers who've been very sweet, very kind, waited for me in some of the interesting places that I frequent as a reporter, many, many dodgy courts, as you well know. One of them, I even kept in touch with him, and he was so sweet to me during that exact same trial period. And he was like, my name is Cool Cat and I support you on Twitter. And I mean, so it's just like the rich tapestry of life in South Africa. But I think that all of us have unfortunately got to relinquish this idea that any environment is necessarily safe, and to really utilize the available products that are there, like the panic button, like the recording, like the driver verification, all of those things that Uber says it's put in place to prevent these kind of things. And then, as you said, if you have those concerns, to make sure you're traveling with someone, to make sure that there are all these layers of protection around you. Because you don't want to go through what Sue Day and those fellow victims have gone through. I mean, what that woman endured and the trauma that she's still living with is horrendous.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that you touch on that. Obviously, not one bad driver means all of them are going to be suspicious or whatever the case. There have been so many drivers that I've come across over the years, and yes, I'm a male, that have been super lovely and shared stories about their experiences, etc., etc. Last question, Karyn. Uber South Africa says it works closely with the cops. We've heard this before. Are you confident the SAPS is up to speed with such cases? From my mind, it doesn't feel like there's a particular, coordinated response to specifically look at e-hailing crime. Is there any conviction rates here? I mean, that's a lot of questions to ask, but in my mind, it doesn't seem like the SAPS might consider this a top priority when there's so many other myriad of issues in our country, as you alluded to.
I think one of the more interesting things that came out at the end of the briefing was the fact that not only does on Uber on its own version says, look, if there's a crime in an Uber, a driver might be, a lot of the time the people asking for help are the drivers because they're subjected to attempted hijackings. I've spoken to an Uber driver who was abducted for 7 hours. There are horrendous experiences that have happened, but unfortunately those kind of issues, we don't see them necessarily being prosecuted. The most high-profile Uber-related matter is this rape case that's in Palmridge. And guess what? It's gone on for 9 years because the judge in that matter died, passed away at the end of the state's case. And all those victims had to come back and testify. And then Sue and a number of others were forced to testify for a third time because of alleged discrepancies in their evidence, which in Sue's case ended up not being discrepancies at all, appeared to be the result of the defense advocate, not necessarily understanding the original testimony. So, we have prominent deficiencies in our legal system. But what I did also find fascinating was right at the end, and I'm actually doing a story on that, so I think it's going to be pretty fascinating, was Uber revealing that it had responded to law enforcement requests for information in tracking down a fugitive banker from Portugal.
Wow.
And also busting a woman who had claimed to be kidnapped and to try and extort money from her parents, and law enforcement then sought information from Uber, and they were able to find her. So it just shows you. I mean, if you're a criminal, I don't know if it's necessarily a wise idea to be using Uber while you claim to be kidnapped / on the run from Interpol.
Absolutely. If you want to read more of our star legal journalist Karyn Maughan's training article on the front page of News 24, it reads, quote, necessary action was taken. Uber SA says Mdoda complaint is resolved, stresses safety features. Karyn, thank you so much for chatting to me on The Lead. I really do appreciate it. And I understand you've already got another breaking news story you have to get to.
Thanks, Graeme.
To our trending topic now, and residents of Bongweni village outside East London say they're relieved following the arrest of former SAA technical chairperson Yake Fatcake Kwinana. Kwinana appeared in the Randburg Magistrates Court this week on charges of extortion, theft and others. Eastern Cape locals claim Kwinana extorted them before demolishing their homes. Police say she's been linked to cases of taxi violence and extortion, but now her, quote, reign of terror is over. Our reportage reveals that Kwinana would deploy armed men to solicit rent from people she claimed were living on her land. 59-year-old Boisana Teo alleges he was forced to tear down his home.
I survive on Ramaphosa's 350 rands grant. I have not been able to find employment. I don't have transport money. I use my head to load the building materials. I have been living here for 5 years. I don't have money to buy the new materials. I will use the same materials to rebuild my shack at designated location.
For more on this trending story, check out journalist Sitandiwe Valapi's coverage under our most read section on the News 24 front page. And finally, while it feels like every other day the mother city's being ranked globally for its scenic beauty, now the grueling Cape Town marathons emerged amongst the world's top 20 most searched marathons, currently in 18th position. Sportshoes.com's running report reveals that there's been a 49% increase in searches for this very event year on year. The findings also show that more women are running competitively than ever before, with female participation rising considerably to 40% in 2024. China's come out tops for the most researched marathons, with the epic Beijing course being the trending running event. Our Cape Town course comes 8 places behind Morocco's Marrakesh Marathon, but local organisers are currently pushing for it to join the International Abbott World Marathon Majors Series. That's a big deal in itself. So if you're keen to lace up and hit the tarmac soon, be sure to register timelessly for the next Cape Town Marathon's 5, 10 and 42 kilometre routes.
Looking to get lost in a new book? Well, this month's free audiobook for News 24 subscribers is
Children of Sugarcane It's a novel by senior journalist Joanne Joseph.
detailing how indentured labourers were brought from India to the Natal colony in the late 1800s.
Here's an excerpt from her book.
The first few days I walked in my mother's shoes, I learned how strenuous her tasks had been, and what little reward they offered. I had to ensure the smooth running of our household, getting up before sunrise to begin preparing my father's breakfast, usually a meal of roti, accompanied by braised potatoes or lentils.
That's been our show. You can mail us your views, news, and voice notes now to thelead@24.com, with editions dropping Monday to Thursday at 7 at night. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, and so long as there's news, we'll have The Lead.